Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Cutrara, and I am the Program Development and Curriculum Innovation Specialist at York University. I work in the Office of the Vice Provost Academic, and I work with all the faculties, all York's faculties across all the different campuses on program development and articulation or re-articulation or, all the different things that can help bring a program more cohesively together. And what I like to think is they're therefore creating a more meaningful student experience. So it's been always such a pleasure to get to know all the different programs and all the different things that we talk about. But I do find that, especially when we're beginning the conversations, a lot of that stuff is very standard across programs. Things like what is curriculum, why learning outcomes are important, how to map your curriculum to the learning outcomes, what a curriculum map is, all those different elements. So I created a website to help with that, but I'm also creating these videos as a complement to that website. So you can do that reading, you can watch these videos, and hopefully have a really good understanding of how to articulate and clearly map a really strong student-centric program. I have created videos on learning outcomes, what they are, writing learning outcomes, writing program learning outcomes already. In this video and the next ones that we're going to be doing, I'm talking about mapping learning outcomes. Now, whenever we are doing a program, like a major modification or a new program proposal or the cyclical review self-study, we ask for 3 different curriculum maps or 3 different learning outcome maps, which might seem like a lot, but really what we're trying to do is show the relationships in really clear ways. And that, I think, is done through 3 maps rather than 1. Now, in my last video where I talked about program learning outcomes, I talked about this kind of older approach to program learning outcomes, where the learning outcomes were there were so many of them, and they were often generic, and they really didn't represent the uniquenesses of a program. And that's because it was a different generation of learning outcomes, and not a different generation of professors, but like a different approach across Ontario of writing learning outcomes that took the degree level expectations, the DLEs. For undergrads, you might be familiar, undergrad programs, you might be familiar with OODLEs, right? The DLEs, the OODLEs. They took these 6 different elements and the programs just wrote learning outcomes underneath all 6 of these elements. And, those, they aren't very creative, right? It's just a really interesting, it's just a list under these degree level expectations, but they aren't really program learning outcomes that represent the uniquenesses of the program at York. And for more on that, go and watch the video on writing program learning outcomes. But when they did that, we knew that learning outcomes were meeting the degree level expectations because the program learning outcomes were basically the degree level expectations, just with your program's name at the beginning, right? And those maps were often just there was just one map and it was all together. And I think it was just kind of confusing in how it was articulated. So when we are moving towards this new way of articulating program learning outcomes, and again, watch those other videos for more of those details, we need to be able to ensure that they are still meeting the degree level expectations. So rather than take the degree level expectations and write a list underneath each of them, which is what the older generation of learning outcomes have done, we want a really nice set of 8 to 12 program learning outcomes, but then we need to make sure they still meet the degree level expectations. So if this is confusing, let me go over to screen share. All right, so this is on the Curriculum Development and Innovation website. It's a public website. You can look at the URL here. It's also in the description below, and you can also get to it through the Vice Provost Academic website. I am in the Learning Outcomes section, specifically mapping learning outcomes here. Just a reminder that these writing learning outcomes elements also have videos, and you definitely need to be able to read that before this makes sense at all. So we have identified 3 different elements here. And again, you need 3 different maps for most of the major modification, new program proposals, cyclical review, self-study. So I'm just going to go over that now. So if you have your concise list of 10 learning outcomes, we want you to map how they meet the degree level expectations. These things in gray right now are the degree level expectations as identified by Quality Council. You can find them on their website right here. On their website here for undergrad, and graduate is below that. You can see depth and breadth of knowledge. I'll just go back here, depth and breadth of knowledge. The next one is knowledge and methodologies, etc. So again, before people would write program learning outcomes by taking these headings and just writing a list underneath them. Not very creative, or articulate the unique elements of your program. So now we want you to write your learning outcomes. And again, watch those videos for help. And then take a look at each one of those program learning outcomes and say, well, which degree level expectations do they meet? And the idea is that it's great when they meet multiple because it shows that integration of knowledge. We don't want a program learning outcome to meet all 6 of them, because then what's the point of a list of them? We want there to be a little bit like a puzzle. So it's not a checklist for completion. It is identifying how your outcomes meet these degree level expectations. And again, they should work together as a really nice puzzle so that students are able to get all the elements of the degree level expectations through your program learning outcomes. But rather than just starting with the degree level expectations, the DLEs, we're starting with your learning outcomes. And so that's why this chart this table is important for you to articulate how your learning outcomes, your program learning outcomes meet and map onto the degree level expectations. And so this is just a simple chart that you can do, right? All I've done is provide X's right here. Now, if you saw on this website here, it isn't just the heading, actually. There are descriptions, and there's 2 columns of descriptions, one for a general bachelor's degree and one for a bachelor's degree honors. If you scroll down, you will see that it's the same for graduate. There's a master's degree and there's a doctoral degree. And there is what depth and breadth of knowledge means at a master's level and what depth and breadth of knowledge means at a doctoral level. So these are actually very important. And we encourage you to start with this simplistic mapping for you just to get kind of acquainted with the degree level expectations. But for a more descriptive mapping, what you can do is you can look at your 90 credit, your regular bachelor's, and you can look at your kind of honors bachelor's, your 120 degree, and you can fill in, rather than an X, you can fill in some of this description. So you can take depth and breadth of knowledge and you can say, well, which elements are we doing here? Now, in my sample, if you can see, I'll make it a little bigger. I'm saying that the first PLO 1, it does meet depth and breadth of knowledge, but it really only does A, only does C, and it does F. So if we go over here, you can see that depth and breadth of knowledge has, for the 90 credit degree, they have all the way up to F, all the different elements. Well, my program learning outcome doesn't do all the elements, but it does these 3. So none of this is my writing. All of this is cutting and pasting from Quality Council's description in order to say, yes, we are doing these different elements. And then you can have this chart for your honors, your 120 as well. Or you can do this for your master's and then also your doctoral work in order to demonstrate those descriptive elements that you are identifying are within your program learning outcome. So again, this is all just cutting and pasting. Doing it simplistically with X's first is a good way just to kind of start thinking about your learning outcomes in relationship to the degree level expectations. And we do ask for this type of mapping in all the different forms that I talked about. And you can provide this descriptive one, or you can just articulate it through the form itself. But if you're just thinking about cutting and pasting and moving things over and really thinking about how they work together, it's not really that onerous work. And what I also find is when you are working with the actual definitions of all these different elements, you might find elements within your program learning outcomes that you can articulate better, or you can bring in a little bit more. Oh, I never thought about it that way. And you can kind of build them up. So meeting the degree level expectations is not difficult. Depth and breadth of knowledge, methodologies, communication, like these are not difficult things, but mapping your program learning outcomes to how they're meeting it is an essential part of any sort of program development or articulation. And then using that descriptive mapping to talk about the details within your degree is a really great way of kind of bringing those things together. So the first map that you're often asked for is just that mapping of your program learning outcomes to the degree level expectations. On that website, I show you a simplistic way to do it and a descriptive way of doing it. And that descriptive way is especially important for differentiating between a 90 credit degree and a 120 credit degree, or a master's program versus a doctoral program, and that you can use those charts as well as articulating that in the body of whatever form that you're using. And that brings those things together. And that way you can use your concise, unique learning outcomes for your program and show how they're meeting the degree level expectations. But you aren't dictating your program through the degree level expectations. And I think that a different generation of PLOs relied on that a little bit more because everyone was just kind of figuring out how these learning outcomes worked for them. So I hope that was useful. Make sure you watch the videos on writing program learning outcomes, as well as the videos that I will be recording on the other two charts that you're going to need in any of these forms, which is your curriculum map and curriculum assessment.